Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is our slow crawl through my Penguin Classics, my March of the Penguins, as Hannah at Hannah's Books calls it. And we are going period by period through this. We're still in the first bookcase of this wall with plenty more books to go. Plenty more. I plan on letting this thing just roll out for the whole of 2020. I might not have done that. I might have gone to just ordinary shelf tours where you pull down one book after another after another. You do 20 books in 20 minutes. If the rest of you hadn't seemed to like the idea of your Daily Penguin, so I'll continue to do this. It feels natural because these books have meant more to me than any other books. I have returned to them more often than any other book. It's uneven. I'm noticing those returns are uneven. I will go back to a Penguin Classic if it is referenced in something that I'm looking at, something that I'm dealing with, in work, with a new book. But the ones that I go back to, regardless of whether it's mentioned or not, are not all of these things. Some of these penguins are not striking that kind of personal chord. And I'm on a crossroads now as to what to do about that. I kind of like my big wall of Penguin Classics. I don't want to drastically decrease it. But we've seen a number of Penguin Classics just in the last 2 months that are not books that I would ordinarily just keep. I almost never return to them, or there's a better version of them, or a different version of them that I like better, or it's a book that I have no interest in whatsoever. So this March of the Penguins is, in addition to a very slow tour of my Penguin Classics, it's also a way for me to get a handle on them, to build a perfect Penguin Classic wall. Now, once upon a time, I thought I was building that wall just because it's a good thing to have, complete control over your books. Now, in the way the world is now, it also serves a practical purpose because it gives me a launching off point for when or if the world ever goes back to normal. I will have my penguins exactly as I want them, and I'll know exactly what I want to get, what I don't have and want, what I don't need and can get rid of, that sort of thing. But we have been bouncing around a bit in the Daily Penguin. We have been going back and forth in time just a bit, and that isn't happening today. We are now in the Italian Renaissance, and we are today dealing with a book that many people would consider to be the handbook of the Italian Renaissance, the quintessential book of the Italian Renaissance, and that is the Book of the Courtier by Baldassare Castiglione, which was published in 1528 in the great Aldine Press in Venice, the press that had been founded by Aldus Manutius in Venice, and Castiglione went there for two very popular reasons in the era in which he wrote this book. One was that it was well known to produce superior books, absolutely beautiful books. If you have a signed presentation copy of the Book of the Courtier by Castiglione from the Aldine Press, if you have a copy of that, you're doing well in this world. I don't know where you'd find a collector to sell it to now, but when the plague disappears, you're doing well. That was one reason why he went there to publish it. And the other reason why he went there is because he was hearing all sorts of very active rumors that if he didn't publish it himself, someone else would publish it. The book had been circulating in samizdat form for quite some time, and people had been loving it. His patrons, the friends of his patrons, his friends, had all been loving this thing. And that is our author, by the way. This is another case, as with Aretino, this is another case where the author was friends with a famous painter who painted the author with the eye of brilliance. So although this is not a photograph, that is exactly what Castiglione looked like. And that's kind of neat to put that on his famous book. But the book, and the book was famous, absolutely famous. It became a gigantic hit, gigantic in the original printing, and then it was translated. It was translated in English, I think, 40 years later, and into lots of other languages, and everybody started to imitate it. But people had started to imitate it and echo it even long before it was translated, because it is a manual about how to be in a courtly world, about how to be a courtier, how to be a court creature, how to behave, how to hold yourself, what things to be good at, what things to disdain, how to speak, how to dress, how to dance, how to gamble, how to joke, how to write, everything you could imagine for public appearance, for being a courtier, which is a vanished profession. So it's a testament to the interest factor of this book that it's stuck around, even though the profession that it describes in exhaustive detail here has largely disappeared. There are courtiers still at courts around the world, but they don't have to act like this at all. They would stand out. They would be freakish if they did. I guess on one level you might say, and certainly in the early part of the 20th century, for instance, when this book had a bit of a vogue, you could say that all of the strictures that Castiglione lays down here work well for public people just in general. That you don't have to be a courtier waiting on the pleasure of a prince, as Castiglione himself did for his entire life. That you don't have to be that. Where are you turning just the right style of sprezzatura for your court? Is your prince going to look on you and think, you make me look good? That even if you're not doing that job, that the Book of the Courtier at its heart teaches you how to comport yourself in public with discretion and proportion and a kind of stoicism, a kind of wry wit, a kind of distancing from the immediate. It's hard to describe because people don't do it anymore. Most people don't do it anymore. I have a feeling that there are elements of that kind of public comportment that most people, especially in Western representative democracies, would really appreciate. If more public servants would do it, they would really appreciate it. If more public servants observe the kind of tasteful, restrained, intelligent comportment that's described in every detail in this book, then maybe they wouldn't bring snowballs into the well of the Senate to joke about catastrophic climate change. Maybe they wouldn't wear antique, elaborate gas masks into the Senate or as senators in order to lampoon a deadly virus. Maybe they wouldn't do that. Maybe they'd have a little more discretion. Maybe they'd act a little better, but good Lord. If we're talking about the kind of public restraint and decorum that Castiglione champions in this book, then the ship has probably already sailed in large parts of the world. I mean, you have Brazil, you have Boris Johnson leading England, leading the United Kingdom, and you have Donald Trump leading the United States. And these people don't know anything about anything that's in this book. They absolutely not. No, complete strangers to anything like the idea of controlling yourself and modulating your appearance to the world to the best advantage and the highest esteem. There's nothing like that happens at all. Where we're largely governed by the, what's his name, Scott Fargus from A Christmas Story. We're largely governed by the brainless and ultimately cowardly loud bully of the neighborhood. All of the three men that I'm describing, the only thing that they're missing is a raccoon cap, and their hair does double duty for that. So, but even if you leave aside the buffoonery of public people today, you still don't find much of an analog for Castiglione, and that has led. That fact has mostly been praised by people in the last century, including George Bull, whose name that is familiar to us now. He's the translator of Penguin's Book of the Courtier, and he has an introduction, and he also praises the fact that we don't act like this anymore. And I don't know. I have a soft spot for this book because Castiglione could have written it as simply a manual. Plenty of people did in his time and slightly afterwards. There were manuals about everything, especially sword fighting and the art of delicate, gentlemanly combat. There are a million manuals like that. We don't remember any of them. They all still exist, but no one reads them anymore. They have no actual merit as literary works. Whereas the Book of the Courtier, in addition to laying down all of these precepts, millions and millions of precepts about what a courtier should and shouldn't do and how, the art of carefully presented nonchalance, that you must be excellent, but you must not seem to try. He could have just written that as a didactic manual. Instead, he chose to cast this in a form that we have touched on before, as dramatic dialogues between actual real historical personages and they don't just spout exposition in order to keep the dialogue going. There's real interaction. There are personal effects. It's very, very interesting to read. Whether you subscribe to any of the behavior that's listed in it or not, it's a very interesting book to read. I believe that this book and a few others, especially the dialogues of Erasmus, the Dutch humanist Erasmus, look very much towards fiction, towards modern fiction. They look very much towards that. They lay the groundwork for it. Because I think a lot of the enjoyment that you get out of reading this book is the interplay of personalities regardless of what they're talking about, which undercuts the idea of it being the book of the courtier, it undercuts it being a didactic work. I think that if you, for instance, don't know anything about this book, you're just hearing about it now, or you heard about it maybe in college, and you pick it up just raw, I would be willing to bet that the thing that will keep you reading will be the interplay of personalities, the different voices, not the instruction that you're getting on exactly how to cross-garter your hoses or exactly how to gamble and what kinds of gambling are acceptable. The main criticism that was leveled against this book in subsequent centuries was that it teaches you to be insincere. It teaches you to be fake. I don't believe that that is actually the case, but there's certainly a strong argument to be made for it. That the more of these principles that you absorb, the finer you will be on the outside and the faker you will be. I think that the book is largely absolved from that kind of hypocrisy, because I think Castiglione wants a lot of the lessons of sprezzatura, of the artful way of being, of presenting yourself to your prince and at court. I think he wants a lot of those principles to go all the way inside. I think he wants you to be like that all the time, not just act like that. Again, there's a case to be made, but there's an equally strong case to be made that he is teaching you how to be a two-faced, completely phony court creature. And that led to a lot of rejection of what's in this book, even on the part of our translator, who had to spend a long time translating this. In his introduction, he writes, "The combination of intense and selfish individualism with appalling snobbery naturally repels the modern reader." That's in the introduction to a book he's hoping to sell. And also the modern historian, who is suspicious of the assumption that history consists in the exploits of the ruling class and the favored few, and who is anxious to know less about the way gifted amateurs danced at court and more about the mortality rates in the villages down the hill. And I suppose that's a hit, a very palpable hit, but I think you can be interested in both. I really do. And you'll never have a more engaging companion in studying the way courtiers danced at court than Castiglione. So your Penguin Classic for today, it's completely antiquated. It's a completely weird thing, in a way that, for instance, the other extremely famous Renaissance advice manual, The Prince by Machiavelli, is maybe not, because we still have princes, we still have rulers. They go by different names, but they still have to worry about the balance between mercy and ruthlessness, between listening to the people and ruling over them, all that sort of, all the crucibles that are in The Prince are still very active today, whereas the Book of the Courtier, not so much. I would argue, and there's a doctoral thesis to be written here by somebody more ambitious than I am. I would argue that in the 21st century, the world might be seeing a revival of a lot of the seemingly casual but extremely painstaking phoniness that is described to a T in this book, and that the world is seeing that in the form of YouTube. I have a feeling that there's a good case to be made that a lot of the world's most famous YouTubers, and a lot of thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are aspiring to be the world's most famous YouTubers, how attractive does it look to earn? Think of the biggest YouTuber of them all, PewDiePie, the well-known white supremacist, fascist, nationalist. PewDiePie makes millions of dollars a week by sitting playing video games with his headphones on, which he would do anyway. That is, of course, a dream. Of course that's a dream. I fiddle with tech anyway. I sit in my room and spout racism anyway. If I could be a millionaire about it, wouldn't that be great? Of course, YouTube has lots of aspiring stars. And even the ones who are tiny, even the ones who have no chance of ever making it big, ever actually having an income stream, still seem in a hurry to perfect the kind of smooth, completely false courtier behavior that's all through this book. It's like they've read it, although I know they haven't. Of course they haven't read it. But still, it can be that the way that behavior on YouTubers. You know the kind of YouTubers I'm talking about, the ones who talk like this and and await their sentences at the end instead of at the beginning. They don't talk. They talk like airline stewardesses who are running through the safety manual for the 8 millionth time. They don't talk like this. They don't talk like a normal person who's putting the cadences of speech the way conversation does. Instead, they talk like game show hosts because they consider their channel to be a game show. Some of them, a lot of them, the worst of them, will say, even if their channel has their own name, let's say Bob Costello, they'll say, "Hi, hey everybody, and welcome back to the latest video from Bob Costello. I'm your host, Bob Costello." like there's a difference. Like there's a parting between, a gap between who I am really and who I am on camera. And who I am on camera is entirely fake and entirely smooth and entirely. I think that people, those of us who are familiar with the world of YouTube, might recognize a lot in the Book of the Courtier, but normal people, no. Bull is correct, and so is every other translator who's ever pointed this out about this author. Normal people in the world act sincere now. In most parts of the world, sincerity has become self-evident virtue. Right? It's well, I don't think you're being straight with me, is viewed as an insult. Whereas in Castiglione's circles in his day, it would have been a compliment, or at least a given. I don't think you're being straight with me, but of course you're not being straight with me. You think more of me and of yourself than to be completely bald sincere with me. Instead, you are putting on an air, and I will do likewise, because we are interacting in public. It's difficult to explain because it's largely gone. That the whole idea of the world that Castiglione describes in this book is largely gone. It has been replaced by one of seeming sincerity. Whether a person is lying to you or not, they want to seem sincere. And that makes this an odd recommend. I do recommend it. Like I said, even if you have nothing to do with the world that he's describing, the world of the Courtier, the idea of the mind frame of the Courtier, you're still going to like the way he writes. Bull's translation is fantastic. You're still going to like just the dialogue between these different people. That is fascinating on its own. You do not need to hunt around for the spare, slipped-in detail about the mortality rates of the village down the hill. Castiglione is interesting anyway. Just, he's got all these interesting characters talking in interesting ways about something that is largely not part of the world anymore. So your Penguin recommendation has a little bit of a caution to it. I don't want you to get bored. This is not a boring author. So I'm gonna leave that there with one of the most influential books of the Italian Renaissance. The Book of the Courtier is one of the most influential ones, probably only behind The Prince by Machiavelli. The only difference being its influence has ended. So we may live to see the day when there are no copies of this in print in paperback. I don't even know if Penguin makes this anymore. No idea. I will always be taught in Italian Renaissance literature classes, so maybe they are. Maybe they do. But it's worth your attention even without being in such a class. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. That is your Penguin Classic for today. It's a signpost. I wish I liked it more than I do, but I still do enjoy it very much so. And I don't have a trade paperback. I have no idea what the modern Penguin looks like. I would be very, very wroth if they changed the cover. If you have a great painter, paint your author, you put that painting on the cover of the book. But I had for a long time a mass market copy of this book that wasn't this painting. It was a very wonderful painting of a young man with a glove, but it wasn't this. And I like that edition too. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. That is your Penguin for today. We'll be back tomorrow. Maybe we'll still be in the Renaissance. Who knows? And I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.